Most leaders are playing the wrong game entirely. They're fighting to win quarterly battles while their competitors are building for centuries. Simon Sinek calls this the difference between finite and infinite games, and it explains why some companies thrive for decades while others flame out despite early success. The finite player asks how to beat the competition. The infinite player asks how to keep playing. One mindset builds quarterly profits. The other builds lasting impact. The difference isn't strategy, it's philosophy. 4 big ideas from this book. 1. Coffee. Let's pour. First, the fundamental difference between finite and infinite games and why most leaders confuse them. Second, why having a just cause matters more than having a mission statement. Third, how worthy rivals actually strengthen your game instead of threatening it. Fourth, the courage to lead with infinite thinking when everyone around you is playing finite. James Carse was watching his students play, and something struck him as profoundly different about how they approached the game. Some students were laser-focused on winning. They strategized, they calculated, they played to end the game victoriously. But others seemed to be playing for an entirely different reason. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to keep the game going. They made moves that prolonged the play, that invited others in, that created more possibilities rather than shutting them down. Carse, being a philosopher, couldn't let this observation slide by. He started to see this pattern everywhere, and it led him to one of the most elegant frameworks for understanding human behavior I've ever encountered. Carse realized there are 2 fundamentally different types of games being played all around us, all the time. Finite games are played to win. They have clear rules, defined players, and they end when someone achieves victory. Think of a tennis match, a chess tournament, or a quarterly sales competition. The boundaries are set, the objective is clear, and when it's over, it's over. Someone wins, someone loses, and everyone goes home. But infinite games operate on completely different principles. Infinite games are played to keep playing. The whole point isn't to end the game by winning, but to perpetuate the game, to keep it alive and evolving. The rules can change, new players can join, and the boundaries are fluid. The purpose isn't victory, it's continuation, growth, adaptation. Simon Sinek took Carse's philosophical insight and applied it to business, leadership, and life in ways that completely reframe how we think about success. When you start looking through this lens, you see finite and infinite games everywhere. Most businesses, for instance, are caught up in finite games, quarterly earnings, market share battles, competitor comparisons. They're playing to win against other companies, to beat last year's numbers, to dominate their industry. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, except when they forget they're actually part of a much larger infinite game. The infinite game in business isn't about beating the competition. It's about outlasting them, about building something that can adapt and thrive long after current competitors have faded away. Companies playing the infinite game focus on their cause, on advancing their vision, on serving something bigger than their immediate financial results. They're not trying to win the market. They're trying to change it, to improve it, to keep the conversation going. You can see this playing out in your own life right now, probably in ways you haven't fully recognized. Take your career, for example. Are you playing a finite game, trying to climb the ladder faster than your colleagues, to get the next promotion, to win the recognition? Or are you playing an infinite game, developing skills that will serve you decades from now, building relationships that create mutual value, contributing to something that will outlast your current position? The difference isn't just philosophical, it changes everything about how you make decisions. In a finite game, you might withhold information from teammates to maintain your competitive edge. In an infinite game, you share knowledge because a stronger team means a stronger game for everyone. In a finite game, you might take shortcuts to hit this quarter's targets. In an infinite game, you invest in capabilities that might not pay off for years, but will keep you adaptable when the landscape shifts. Even in relationships, these dynamics play out constantly. Some people approach dating like a finite game. They're trying to win someone over, to secure the relationship, to reach some end state of commitment. Others approach it as an infinite game. They're focused on growing together, on creating something that can evolve and deepen over time, on building a partnership that gets stronger through challenges rather than one that's threatened by them. The tricky part is that finite and infinite players often end up in the same game together, and they're operating by completely different rules. The finite player is trying to end the game by winning. The infinite player is trying to keep the game going by adapting. This creates all sorts of confusion and conflict, because they're not even playing the same game, despite sharing the same field. What makes this framework so powerful is that it forces you to examine your fundamental assumptions about what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to win, or are you trying to keep playing? Are you focused on beating others or on becoming better? Are you optimizing for short-term victory or long-term vitality? The infinite mindset doesn't mean you ignore competition or short-term results. It means you see them as part of a larger game that extends far beyond any single contest. You play to improve, to learn, to build something that can outlast the current rules and players. Ask yourself, in the most important areas of your life right now, are you playing to win or playing to keep playing? The year was 1903, and two races for human flight were unfolding simultaneously. On one side, Samuel Langley had everything going for him. The Smithsonian Institution backed him with $50,000 in government funding, a fortune at the time. He had the best engineers money could buy, access to cutting-edge materials, and the full weight of institutional support. His goal was crystal clear and finite: be the first human to achieve powered flight. Winner takes all, glory forever, place in the history books secured. Meanwhile, in a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbright Wright were tinkering with their own flying machine. They had no funding to speak of, certainly no government backing, and they were financing their experiments by fixing bicycles. But here's what made them fundamentally different from Langley. They weren't racing to be first. They were obsessed with something bigger. They believed that human beings should be able to fly, and they were willing to dedicate their lives to making that vision a reality, whether it took them 2 years or 20. Langley launched his great aerodrome in October 1903 with reporters watching and cameras rolling. It crashed spectacularly into the Potomac River. He tried again in December. Another crash. His funding dried up, his team dispersed, and he abandoned the project entirely. 9 days later, on a remote beach in North Carolina with no fanfare and only a handful of witnesses, the Wright brothers achieved sustained, powered flight. But here's the remarkable thing: they didn't stop there. While the world celebrated them as the winners of the race, they kept working. They spent the next several years perfecting their design, teaching others to fly, and building the foundation of modern aviation. This is what Sinek calls the power of a just cause. Langley was playing a finite game with finite rules and a clear endpoint: be first to fly. The Wright brothers were playing an infinite game, driven by a cause so compelling that winning or losing any particular battle was irrelevant. Their just cause wasn't about beating Samuel Langley or achieving fame. It was about advancing a vision of human capability that was bigger than themselves, bigger than their lifetimes, and worth pursuing regardless of the obstacles. A just cause, according to Sinek, has 5 essential characteristics. It's for something, not against something. It's inclusive of all who wish to contribute. It's service-oriented, focused on the primary benefit of others. It's resilient, able to endure political and technological change. And it's idealistic, describing a future state that doesn't yet exist but is so appealing that people are willing to make sacrifices to advance it. Think about the companies and organizations you admire most, the ones that seem to attract the best talent, inspire fierce loyalty, and somehow keep innovating decade after decade. They're almost certainly driven by something that looks like a just cause. They're not just trying to maximize quarterly profits or capture market share, though those things might happen as byproducts. They're advancing a vision of how the world should work that's compelling enough to get people out of bed every morning with genuine enthusiasm. Now consider your own work, your own projects, your own daily efforts. Are you playing finite games or infinite games? Are you optimizing for short-term wins, trying to beat specific competitors, focused on hitting particular numbers by particular deadlines? Or are you contributing to something larger, something that could continue advancing long after you're gone, something that makes the world work a little better for people you'll never meet? The difference shows up in how you make decisions under pressure. When you're driven by a finite goal, setbacks feel devastating because they threaten your ability to win the game. When you're driven by a just cause, setbacks become information, obstacles become puzzles to solve, and competition becomes irrelevant because you're not trying to beat anyone. You're trying to advance something bigger than winning. This doesn't mean abandoning practical concerns or ignoring business realities. The Wright brothers still needed to eat, still needed materials, still needed to solve technical problems. But their just cause gave them a different relationship to those challenges. Instead of asking, "How do we beat Langley?" they asked, "How do we advance human flight?" Instead of "How do we win this race?" they asked, "How do we serve this vision?" The beautiful thing about operating from a just cause is that it tends to attract others who share that vision. The Wright brothers didn't just build an airplane, they built a movement. People wanted to learn from them, work with them, carry their vision forward. Langley, for all his resources and advantages, built a project that died with his first failures. Ask yourself, what would you keep working on even if you knew you'd never get credit for it? There's a moment in business history that perfectly captures how radically our thinking can shift when we stop trying to win and start trying to keep playing. In 1997, Apple was 90 days from bankruptcy. Steve Jobs had just returned to the company he'd co-founded, and Microsoft was the undisputed king of personal computing. Bill Gates controlled roughly 90% of the operating system market. Apple had about 3%. By every traditional measure, Microsoft had won and Apple had lost. But then something fascinating happened at the Macworld Boston conference that August. Jobs took the stage and did something that shocked everyone in attendance. Instead of declaring war on Microsoft, instead of positioning them as the enemy to be destroyed, he announced a partnership. Bill Gates appeared on the giant screen behind Jobs via satellite link, and the two men who had spent years trying to eliminate each other began talking about collaboration. Microsoft would invest $150 million in Apple and commit to developing Office for Mac for at least 5 years. The crowd booed. They wanted blood. They wanted their David to slay Goliath, but Jobs understood something they didn't. He had stopped playing a finite game and started playing an infinite one. This shift reveals what Sinek calls the principle of worthy rivals. In finite games, competitors exist to be beaten, eliminated, crushed. You measure success by how thoroughly you can dominate or destroy the other player. But in infinite games, other players serve a completely different purpose. They're not obstacles to your victory. They're the very thing that keeps you growing, improving, and staying in the game. A worthy rival is someone who reveals your weaknesses, forces you to innovate, and pushes you to become better than you thought possible. Jobs recognized that Microsoft wasn't Apple's enemy to be destroyed. Microsoft was Apple's worthy rival, the player who would force Apple to stay sharp, to keep innovating, to never become complacent. Without Microsoft's dominance, Apple might never have developed the revolutionary thinking that led to the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. The pressure of having such a formidable rival in the game pushed Apple to find entirely new ways to play. This isn't just about billion-dollar tech companies. This principle transforms how you think about every relationship in your working life. That colleague who always seems to get the recognition you want, who lands the projects you're after, who speaks up in meetings while you're still forming your thoughts. Your instinct might be to see them as competition to be outmaneuvered or undermined. But what if they're actually your worthy rival, The person whose very presence in your professional ecosystem makes you sharper, more creative, more resilient. I see this playing out constantly in creative industries. The novelist who watches another writer's success and feels that familiar sting of envy, then uses that energy to push deeper into their own work. The entrepreneur who sees a competitor launch a feature they wish they'd thought of first, then realizes it's revealed a blind spot in their own product development. The consultant who loses a client to someone with a different approach, then discovers that loss has forced them to articulate their own methodology more clearly than ever before. The shift happens when you stop asking, "How do I beat them?" and start asking, "What are they teaching me about my own game?" Your worthy rival shows you where you're playing it safe, where you've gotten comfortable, where you've stopped pushing boundaries. They don't exist to be eliminated. They exist to keep you honest. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop competing. It means you compete in service of something larger than just winning the immediate contest. You compete to advance the entire field, to raise the standard of play, to keep the game itself vibrant and worth playing. When Apple and Microsoft shifted from trying to destroy each other to pushing each other forward, both companies became more innovative, more valuable, more essential to their customers' lives. The most successful people I know have learned to identify their worthy rivals and pay attention to what those rivals are teaching them. They've stopped wasting energy on resentment or schemes to undermine the competition. Instead, they channel that competitive energy into becoming impossible to ignore through the quality of their own work. Your worthy rival might be sitting 3 desks away from you right now. They might be running a business similar to yours in the next town over. They might be writing in your genre, consulting in your specialty, or teaching in your field. The question isn't whether you're going to have rivals. The question is whether you're going to let them make you bitter or let them make you better. Ask yourself, who in your professional world consistently challenges you to raise your game, and how might you shift from seeing them as a threat to seeing them as a gift? Disney built its empire on hand-drawn animation. For decades, their artists perfected the craft that brought us Snow White, Bambi, and The Lion King. The company's identity was inseparable from those flowing lines and watercolor backgrounds that emerged from thousands of individual drawings. Then Pixar came along with Toy Story in 1995, and everything changed. Computer animation wasn't just a new technique. It was a complete revolution that threatened to make Disney's core competency obsolete. Here's what's remarkable about Disney's response. They could have doubled down on hand-drawn animation. They could have argued that their traditional methods were superior, more artistic, more authentic. They could have treated Pixar as a threat to be defeated rather than a signal to be heeded. Instead, Disney made one of the most difficult decisions a company can make. They abandoned their signature strength to stay true to something deeper. Disney realized they weren't actually in the hand-drawn animation business. They were in the storytelling business. Animation was just the vehicle, not the destination. So when computer animation proved to be a more powerful vehicle for reaching audiences, Disney didn't just adapt. They acquired Pixar for $7.5 billion and transformed their entire creative process. They let go of what made them successful to preserve what made them essential. This is what Sinek calls existential flexibility, the willingness to dramatically change how you operate in order to stay true to why you exist. It's perhaps the most counterintuitive concept in business and life, because it requires abandoning the very things that brought you success. Most of us, most organizations, most leaders do exactly the opposite. We cling to our proven methods, our established expertise, our comfortable routines, even when the world around us has shifted. But infinite players understand something finite players miss. That survival isn't about being right about your methods. It's about being committed to your purpose. Disney's purpose wasn't to preserve hand-drawn animation as an art form. Their purpose was to tell stories that connect with audiences across generations. When they saw that computer animation could serve that purpose better, they made the leap. even though it meant rebuilding their entire creative infrastructure. Think about how this shows up in your own life right now. Maybe you've built your career around a particular skill set that's becoming less relevant. Maybe you've organized your business around systems that worked perfectly 5 years ago but feel clunky today. Maybe you've structured your relationships or your routines around assumptions that no longer hold true. The finite game response is to defend these things, to prove they still work, to fight the changing landscape. The infinite game response is to ask what deeper purpose these methods were serving, and whether there might be better ways to serve that same purpose now. I see this playing out everywhere. Journalists who built careers around print media learning to create podcasts and video content. Retail store owners who spent decades perfecting in-person customer service, now mastering e-commerce and digital relationships. Parents who raised one child with certain approaches discovering those same approaches don't work with their second child, or in a different cultural moment. The temptation is always to stick with what we know, to prove that our way is still the right way. But existential flexibility asks us to hold our methods lightly and our purpose tightly. It asks us to regularly examine whether the things we're doing are still the best ways to accomplish what we're actually trying to accomplish. Sometimes the answer is yes. Your methods are still serving your purpose well. But sometimes the answer is that you've become so attached to how you do things that you've forgotten why you do them. The most successful people and organizations I observe have mastered this dance. They're clear about their core purpose, but ruthlessly experimental about their methods. They'll abandon a profitable product line if it no longer serves their mission. They'll restructure their entire operation if a new approach better serves their customers. They'll let go of expertise that took years to develop if different expertise is now more valuable. This isn't about changing for the sake of change or chasing every new trend. It's about having such clarity on your deeper game that you can recognize when your current tactics are getting in the way of your larger strategy. Disney didn't abandon hand-drawn animation because computer animation was newer or flashier. They abandoned it because they could see it would help them tell better stories to more people. The method changed, but the mission remained constant. Ask yourself, what methods are you holding onto that might actually be preventing you from better serving your real purpose? Simon Sinek makes a distinction that changes how you see everything. Finite games have known players, fixed rules, and agreed-upon objectives where someone wins and the game ends. Infinite games have known and unknown players, changeable rules, and the objective is to keep playing. Most of us approach business, relationships, even life itself as finite games when they're actually infinite. He introduces the concept of a just cause, a specific vision of a future state that doesn't yet exist, something worth pursuing that's bigger than yourself. Then there are worthy rivals, not enemies to defeat but other players who reveal your weaknesses and push you to improve. Finally, existential flexibility, the capacity to make profound strategic shifts to advance your just cause, even when it means abandoning practices that brought you success. Write down your just cause in one sentence, not your mission statement or quarterly goals, but the future state you want to help create that's bigger than your current situation. Make it specific enough to be meaningful but broad enough to guide decisions for years. Put it somewhere you'll see it daily, and let it inform one decision you make this week. That's one book, one coffee.